It started like any other ordinary evening. A driver was heading home after a long day. The road was quiet. Traffic was light. Nothing unusual was happening. Then flashing red and blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, the driver assumed it was nothing serious, maybe a burned-out taillight, maybe rolling a stop sign, maybe driving a few miles over the speed limit, a routine traffic stop, something that happens to millions of drivers across the United States every single year. But within minutes, that routine stop would turn into something very different, and it all happened because of one simple mistake, a mistake that many drivers make without even realizing it. And by the end of the encounter, that driver was taken into custody. What happened during that stop is now raising serious questions about what drivers should and should not do when interacting with police on the roadside. Because the reality is this: most drivers believe they understand their rights during a traffic stop. But many of those beliefs are wrong, and a single misunderstanding can quickly escalate a situation that should have ended with nothing more than a warning. So today, we're going to break down what happened, step by step. What the driver did, why officers reacted the way they did, and most importantly, what every driver needs to know to avoid making the same mistake. Because when you're sitting behind the wheel and those lights appear behind you, the decisions you make in the next few seconds matter more than you might think. The stop. The incident happened on a suburban road late in the evening. The driver, whose name was not immediately released in early reports, was traveling through a quiet area when a patrol officer noticed something. According to the officer's report, the vehicle drifted slightly over the lane marker. It wasn't a dramatic movement, but it was enough for the officer to initiate a traffic stop. Within seconds, the patrol lights came on. The driver pulled over. At this point, everything about the situation was completely routine. Police officers conduct millions of traffic stops every year. Most of them end quickly. An officer approaches the vehicle. They explain the reason for the stop. The driver provides license, registration, and proof of insurance. Sometimes there's a ticket, sometimes just a warning. Then everyone goes on their way. But this stop didn't follow that path, and the moment things started to change came when the officer approached the driver's window. The first conversation body camera footage later released shows the officer calmly greeting the driver. The officer explains why the vehicle was stopped and asks for the standard documents: license, registration, insurance. The driver begins searching through the glove compartment. But during that moment, something else becomes clear. The driver appears nervous. Now, nervousness alone is not unusual during a traffic stop. In fact, many people feel anxious when interacting with law enforcement. But officers are trained to pay attention to behavior. And in this case, the officer noticed something else. The driver hesitated before answering a simple question. Is there anything in the vehicle I should know about? It's a question officers sometimes ask during traffic stops, and the way someone answers can affect what happens next. The driver paused, then responded with a short answer, no, but the officer wasn't fully convinced, so they asked a follow-up question. And that's when the situation started to shift. The question that changed everything. The officer asked whether the driver had any weapons in the vehicle. Now, this question is not unusual. Depending on the state, drivers may legally carry firearms inside their vehicles, but the laws surrounding that can vary dramatically. Some states require drivers to immediately inform officers if they are carrying a firearm. Others do not. Some states allow concealed carry without a permit. Others require strict licensing. But what matters during a traffic stop is communication. And in this case, communication broke down. The driver again answered quickly, no. But according to the officer, something didn't add up. The driver continued reaching around inside the vehicle while searching for documents. And the officer noticed something in the center console. A small object that looked familiar. The officer immediately asked the driver to stop moving their hands. And that's when the situation escalated. The simple mistake. Here's the moment that changed everything. The driver had a legally owned firearm inside the vehicle. But instead of calmly informing the officer about it, the driver chose not to mention it. And during the stop, the officer spotted what appeared to be the firearm partially visible near the console. Now, from the officer's perspective, this raised two concerns immediately. First, officer safety. Second, the possibility that the driver had just lied about the presence of a weapon. At that point, the officer gave a clear command. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The driver complied, but the tension had already increased dramatically. Backup officers were requested. Within minutes, additional patrol cars arrived at the scene. And what began as a simple traffic stop had turned into a high-alert situation. Why officers react this way to understand why things escalated so quickly, it helps to understand how traffic stops are viewed from a law enforcement perspective. For police officers, traffic stops are one of the most unpredictable parts of the job. Every stop involves uncertainty. Officers approach a vehicle without knowing who is inside. They don't know if the driver is calm, angry, intoxicated, or potentially armed. Because of that uncertainty, officers are trained to control the situation quickly. Clear communication, clear visibility of the driver's hands, and honesty from the driver. When any of those elements break down, officers may assume a potential threat, and that appears to be what happened here. From the officer's point of view, the driver had denied having a weapon, yet one appeared to be visible inside the car. That contradiction immediately changed the nature of the stop. The investigation on the roadside. Once backup officers arrived, the driver was asked to step out of the vehicle. The driver complied. Officers then secured the firearm. Reports later confirmed that the weapon was legally owned. But the situation wasn't over, because the issue was no longer simply possession of a firearm. The issue was the driver's earlier statement. In some jurisdictions, providing false information during a police investigation can carry legal consequences, and officers began asking additional questions. Why did the driver say there was no weapon? Did the driver intentionally conceal that information? Was the driver aware of the firearm disclosure laws in that state? The driver reportedly explained that they were nervous and simply didn't think about mentioning it. But by that point, officers had already made their decision, taken into custody. After further discussion, officers placed the driver into custody, not for owning the firearm, but for the actions during the traffic stop. The exact charge depended on local law, but it involved providing false information and failing to follow lawful instructions during the encounter. The driver was transported to a local station for processing, and what began as a minor traffic stop had turned into a legal situation that could follow the driver for years, all because of one simple mistake, failing to communicate clearly about a weapon in the vehicle. Why this situation matters. Stories like this are becoming increasingly common across the country, not necessarily because drivers are doing anything criminal, but because firearm laws and traffic stop procedures can be confusing. Different states have different rules. Some require immediate disclosure, some do not. Some allow firearms in vehicles without permits, others have strict storage requirements, and many drivers simply don't know the exact law where they live. That confusion can lead to moments like this one, moments where a driver thinks they are avoiding a problem, but actually creates a bigger one. What drivers should know. Legal experts often give similar advice when it comes to traffic stops. First, remain calm. Second, follow the officer's instructions carefully. Third, keep your hands visible at all times. And fourth, be honest, even if the situation feels uncomfortable, because misunderstandings during a traffic stop can escalate quickly. And once a situation escalates, it becomes much harder to bring it back down. The bigger picture. Incidents like this also highlight a broader discussion happening across the United States. The balance between public safety, gun ownership rights, and police procedure. Traffic stops sit right at the intersection of those issues. For officers, safety is the priority. For drivers, understanding the law is critical. And when the two sides don't communicate clearly, even routine encounters can spiral into something far more serious. The lesson. In the end, the driver in this story didn't start the evening expecting to deal with police. They certainly didn't expect to end the night in custody. But a simple decision during a few tense seconds changed everything. Not necessarily because of bad intentions, but because of a misunderstanding about what officers needed to know. And that's why experts say awareness is key. Understanding your responsibilities during a traffic stop, knowing your state's laws, and remembering that how you respond in those moments matters. Because sometimes the difference between driving away with a warning and being taken into custody comes down to a single moment, a single decision, and a single mistake.